All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our third meeting. Just as a reminder, I am recording this. We've got enough folks moving, so a couple things, just housekeeping things before we start up. In terms of written comments, there's no need to send them through me to send them out, then send them out to the work group. I know I've had one or two folks do that. One because he indicated that he couldn't send it out to the entire work group. So if that's the case, I'm fine doing that. But please don't feel obligated to send me the comments first. But I'm happy to do it whichever way. But I will not be offended if you don't send them through me. Let's see, everybody's joining now. Also, if parties need more time to file comments, just please let me know so we can plan accordingly. I know everyone's schedules are packed with everything else, and this is just kind of another duty as assigned. So, and everyone's resources may not be the same as everyone else's. So, just let me know. I obviously want to give everyone an opportunity to weigh in, but if you need more time, just let me know. Also, I had one inquiry about holding in-person meetings versus virtual. Just something to think about. We don't have to decide that now, but I've done some in-person meetings, and sometimes it's you get a little more of a dialogue going. So I'm certainly not opposed to it. But I also know that we can get a lot more people doing it virtually. So maybe we can do some kind of a hybrid, assuming that there's interest for an in-person meeting. So with that, anything before we get moving? No. All right. So one of the things I'd like to, my plan for today is to touch on the Mr. Verchinsky's suggestion for defining the utilities vision. Then we'll get to the BG grant proposals. The Exelon Strawman proposals, those will be coming next week, and we will talk about them on the 19th. So just mark your calendars for that. And then we can start talking about the JADE process map. And we did get some comments on that. So in terms of Mr. Verchinsky's vision, sir, did you want to tee that up, or do you just want to throw it out there for comments?
Paul Verchinsky, good morning. I'd like to throw it out there for comments and discussion. If we don't know where we're headed, then any road will get you there. And we need a vision that people agree on for what we want to do with the grid in Maryland across all 5 utilities.
Sure.
So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Okay, no, absolutely. Is anybody want to jump in? I looked at your comments and what the Exelon utilities put forward, and I kind of drafted something, but before I show that and have it ripped apart and as to why it's not good, I'll just throw it out there if anybody has any initial comments on it. All right, nobody does. Okay. All right, well, let me ask this. Do folks agree with Mr. Verchinsky's concept that we need a vision for the utilities? Sure, we'll go with Samantha and then Mr. Bartlett. Samantha? All right, we'll come back. Mr. Bartlett.
Yes, thank you, Judge McLean. Yeah, as I said in the comments that I sent yesterday, I agree with Mr. Verchinsky, and I think he stated it well. If we don't know where we're going, then we can't say whether the different elements that we're talking about actually are going to get us there. So we really have to have that endpoint clearly in mind and keep going back to it as we look at what's being proposed for the planning process.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. Ms. Weaver? All right. She's having mic issues. All right. All right. Samantha, you there?
Hi there. Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry about that. I had to dial in on my phone. Good morning, everyone. I wanted to just offer support for the comments that Mr. Raczynski submitted, as well as Al Bartlett. And I think based on, all the sort of dialogue back and forth via email, I have a bit of a process recommendation or proposal for the group. And I think it aligns almost directly with comments that OPC submitted as well. I guess the recommendation is, it seems to me that there's a threshold question for us about whether the JADE roadmap is the right framework to use for this conversation. And I think that that's a key question. And I think once we decide that it is, the structure here becomes much more clear, because I think what we could do is sort of meeting by meeting step through each of the major components of the roadmap. And I bring this up now because one of the main components of the roadmap is, establishing a vision and focusing on, whether or not distribution system planning meets policy objectives, et cetera. So I wanted to just kind of tee that up early on, because I do think that's still a threshold question is, are we going to walk through the JADE roadmap, or are we going to do something else? And either way, I agree that, we should start with some kind of high level objective visioning process, but just wanted to bring that up. Thanks.
Okay. No, thank you for those comments. And the way I kind of envisioned, at least going through the roadmap, I think it was maybe based on OPC's comments, were to take, I think what they had suggested was maybe to take a couple blocks in each step, and we could probably address the factors set forth in 7802 along the way. Is that kind of what you were thinking, Samantha? All right. I'm not sure. All right. Jacob.
Yeah, thanks, Judge. And good morning, everyone. So, in terms of the vision, obviously, the utilities have spoken to kind of the broad visions in different documents and can speak to those, as well as, a vision in our comments as it relates to the planning and really, all the efforts that the group is doing and driving towards, the climate ready grid. And so we'd be happy to circulate some of those documents and like I said, as well, in some of the comments provided, kind of put forth some of that vision for the distribution system planning.
Okay. All right. Anybody? Eli.
Thanks, Judge. Yes, and wanted to thank Samantha as well for kind of seconding our proposed approach. Just to put a little bit of a finer point on what we had proposed on behalf of OPC in our comments, what we were trying to get at, I think, is ultimately that one of the things that might have been part of the downfall of phase one of the DSP work group was that there wasn't a particularly clear process set forth or objectives set forth with each meeting and for the overall process as well. So I think at a high level, I certainly, we certainly support the idea that an overarching vision, at least for the work group, a vision, an objective, something to be driving towards, will provide a lot of clarity and, I think a clearer framework for us to kind of walk through on a meeting by meeting basis. To speak to our comments in just a little bit more detail, I think what we were trying to get at is that, the state has expressed, the legislature has expressed explicit support for the JADE roadmap approach. It's one of the directives of the work group to understand how JADE can fit within Maryland's processes. And so what our recommendation is ultimately, it is along the lines of what you started to speak to, Judge McLean, which is that we would go kind of step by step within the JADE process map and determine how the work group should achieve each of those boxes within the JADE roadmap. I think there was the final report where it kind of landed in phase one was that JADE was already largely incorporated within the state's processes. But I don't know, we would not particularly agree with that statement. Starting, and I won't go through every single box, but for example, in step one of our comments, we highlight developing guidance or rules for the whole process. So with the starting point, looking at what an ultimate DSP process should look like, and this work group coming up with the actual guidance, how stakeholders participate in that process, what utilities are required to do through that process, the metrics that are going to be used to judge performance within that process, et cetera. And yeah, so I think ultimately the idea of developing a work group wide vision is very related to the idea of then breaking that vision down into like a step-by-step approach that allows us to have a clear objective with each meeting that says, all right, we are going to solve for X, meaning we are going to solve for these 2 boxes in the JADE roadmap and determine exactly how, what needs to change in the state in order to fully operationalize JADE, if you will, within that box. And so, yeah, I think ultimately the idea of coming up with an ultimate vision statement for the work group itself would jive with the proposal that we put forth.
So you don't think, are you saying that we don't need a overall vision for the utilities, but you want a vision for the work group? I mean, I don't know that we necessarily need my opinion, we don't need a vision. We've kind of got our marching orders from the commission's order. How we get through that, I thought we were kind of moving forward through that, with the agenda. I was trying to give everyone a heads up as to what we're going to be covering each week.
Yeah, I guess my thoughts on the agenda approach and coming out of the last meeting, what felt a little bit unclear was what we were specifically as a work group trying to solve for in that meeting. And I guess my concern is that if we don't have a clear stated objective within each meeting, then it's not going to result in like a specifically productive discussion that's going to lead to resolving that specific issue. I think there was a lot of really helpful discussion during the last meeting, but I don't know that each statement was kind of targeted towards achieving the same thing. And I think that might result in a lot of folks speaking past one another, which is something that I think we witness a lot in the first phase. And so I just think providing maybe meeting specific objectives and additional detail as to like what are the boxes of JADE, or what exactly are we going to hear from and be expected to respond to within each meeting, will allow us to methodically walk through JADE. In terms of a vision for the overall utilities, I guess I could see that being helpful. I guess what I might see clarity on, and I think someone put this in the chat, is the idea that the bolded line from Paul's email, which says, we support the formation of net zero grids for all utilities in Maryland. Is that intended to be the vision? And if so, I think it's a strong vision, but I don't know that in practice having that vision gets us to where we need to be procedurally. I think procedurally is the kind of main concern that we're trying to raise with these comments, is that we just need a very clear framework in order to be able to achieve what I think this work group is trying to achieve, which is how does JADE apply to the state?
Right. Well, and just in terms of the meeting so far, the way I kind of view at least the first two is kind of, first one was kind of where things stood as of like after the first phase of this, and then the second was more or less kind of what the utilities have on the books now. And now I think we're getting into the meat and potatoes of what we're supposed to accomplish. So, all right, but I hear you. Yes, Jacob.
Yeah, I just want to chime in, just, recognize that, especially this phase 2 of the working group, it's really being driven by what the legislation says, and the legislation is really driving towards how we're incorporating stakeholder engagement, how we're incorporating those 12 policy goals. And there's not necessarily kind of discussion around that J process map. So while it's a helpful framing, I think we really should be focusing on as a working group. And I think you have that kind of outlined in the agenda of how we're addressing those 12 points within the legislation, how we're addressing stakeholder feedback, and really driving towards solutions to address those within the planning process.
Right. And again, based on, the comments that we received, or I received, I think we might be able to do it hand in hand. Because I do think that the policy goals, or at least most of them, fit into somewhere in the JADE process map. Would you kind of agree with that, Jacob?
I think, the J process map kind of creates a ideal version of distribution system planning. And I think, the creators acknowledge that, but, there's certainly, nuances to the Maryland and the different utilities that, are for consideration, I think.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's, I think, it's a tool, it's a framework, but it's not etched in stone. And I think the commission at least wants us to at least attempt to suggest how it should be changed, to the extent that it can. At least that's my understanding of the order. Ethan.
Yes, I just wanted to say, we're kind of mixing two things together now, and we presented our comments. We're very supportive of Paul Verchinsky's vision statement. We had our own vision statement. There was a very short version, but I think that it encapsulated basically the same spirit. We do agree with OPC on things like not that there should be non-wire solutions employed, that there's transparency. That should be included in the DSP, and there should be feedback from stakeholders, and that, about forecasting for EVs. But a lot of OPC's submission seem to be very prescriptive. That there should be a one-size-fits-all for all utilities, which, after what we went through in phase 1, seeing the diversity of Maryland utilities and what we've learned in other working groups working with them, it seems overly prescriptive. And also the JADE roadmap itself, it seems that the commission has already ruled that it's to be modified to fit Maryland, not vice versa. And that seems to fit more with the flexible kind of approach that Order 9077 describes. So, we believe that the agenda, as you've set it out, Judge McLean, works very well for driving the conversation. And while the JADE roadmap is a guide, it's an ideal, according to NARUC NASIO themselves, it's an idealized flow chart and should not be used to contain our conversations. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, and Ethan, that's a good point. I do recognize that we need to create something that's flexible for everyone, and that in one size fits all won't be the solution. And I certainly don't want to discourage conversation or anything like that. But I think the commission did say that we should look to see how it should be modified. Again, I don't want this to be a rigid framework, but I think we might be able to kill two birds with one stone if we can set up the agenda properly. Mr. Bartlett.
Yeah, thank you, Judge. Just wherever we come out on terms of actually using JADE as a structure, I just do want to agree with, there was a point that Eli made, that as we look at different elements of the planning process, for example, DER forecasting, we need to be able to ask the question, is the approach that this or that or other utility is proposing, or that we all agree is needed, is that actually going to get us to where we need to be? And if that approach or those approaches aren't going to get us there, what do we need to have in planning that actually will make sure that we are on the road towards the outcomes we need? And for that reason, we have to have those outcomes operationally agreed upon. Again, what does DER planning look like? Different utilities have already presented a little bit of some DER planning that they have, but is that adequate to get us to where we need to be? And that's why we need that endpoint defined and agreed upon with a little bit more operational clarity.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. There's a couple comments in the chat. Staff doesn't believe a vision or a statement's necessary for the utilities as much as developing overall guidelines for the DSP process. All right. And then Samantha, Eli clarified OPC is not looking for a one-size-fits-all. Samantha's still having mic issues, but she noted that the commission's order directed us to continue to work with an eye towards developing a consensus of Maryland DSP practices. And she suggested it might be helpful to understand whether there's a group consensus on following the JADE match approach and how and whether and how that approach might need to be modified. All right, so before I get to Jacob and Eli, anybody have a response to Samantha's suggestion on the JADE map, on where folks agree that it's a okay, go ahead, Eli.
Thanks, Judge McLean. My response is to kind of second a lot of what Samantha is saying. Just want to highlight the order that relaunched this work group, and it speaks to specifically the 12 the 12 state policy goals that this, if I'm understanding correctly, that this work group is specifically being directed by the commission to develop and ultimately adopt regulations that allow the commission to implement those 12 state policy goals. And I hear where the utilities are coming from in saying that they think JADE needs to change to fit Maryland, and they don't think the Maryland process needs to change to fit JADE, but I think we would disagree with that.
Okay.
I think looking at these 12 state policy goals, it became clear during phase one of this work group that the current DSP process largely does not allow us, the state, to achieve these goals. For example, measures to decrease GHG emissions incident to distribution, including high levels of DER and electric vehicles. We highlighted in the first work group that the majority of Maryland utilities do not forecast DER and EV and use that within the distribution system planning process. There needs to be a clear approach across Maryland in order to incorporate DERs and EVs into forecasting, such that the utilities can plan the distribution system according to those forecasts. That is one of the 12 state policy goals. JADE includes an explicit process by which to incorporate state policy goals. It's in that first step. There's a box dedicated to it, right? That's just one example of, I think, one of the state policy goals that DSP in Maryland is not set out explicitly to achieve today. And if I'm understanding the commission's direction correctly, it is for this work group to develop a process to achieve that. That's just one example. It refers to bidirectional power flows, transparent stakeholder participation, increased use of DERs. There are a lot of elements of these 12 state policy goals that I think we would argue are not well functioning within the DSP as is today. And JADE simply provides a framework with which the utilities can learn from and adapt to in order to better incorporate and actually effectuate those state policy goals. And JADE provides, I think we would argue, the ability for them to get closer to being able to do that.
Your Honor, mind if I chime in real quick?
Sure, Pearl.
You missed me.
No,
Everybody missed me.
you're
'Cause-
jumping the line, but it's all right.
Well, because I don't think that we necessarily disagree with Eli on a lot of these pieces, and it feels like we are talking past each other. So what we're saying, as certainly from a PHI perspective, can't speak for all the utilities in the state, is we're saying there are challenges in not the existing planning process from a JADE perspective, but there are challenges in order to integrate the state's goal into the planning process. We're saying, let's talk about what those challenges are. Those challenges are not a flow chart, which again, we think is a really helpful conceptual way to think about it, but talking about the steps there isn't going to get us there. We're talking about what do we need to change in order to enable the utilities to plan in a way which is going to be more oriented to the state's goals. We just don't see that the JADE roadmap and focusing on that process, that's process. We're saying, hey, how do we need to change the way that we think about a longer term view so that we can get a longer term view of what the system is going to look like? When we're talking about being able to integrate loads into our forecasting process, we have to have a certain level of certainty from a regulatory perspective in order to survive a prudency review. That's a challenge. Let's talk about those challenges. Those challenges are known. Eli, to your point, a lot of those challenges are known. Let's talk about what those challenges are. Let's work towards solutions towards those challenges. Some of those may be COMAR changes. Some of those may be commission guidance. But let's focus on those challenges. If we just look at the process map, we're not going to get there. I think that's really what we're saying, is we need to focus on those challenges. We know what they are. Let's focus on those challenges. Let's attack those. Let's get to where Al and Paul are saying we need to go. And that process map isn't going to get us there.
And I think what I'm trying to get at, Pearl, is to use, because we totally agree with you that yes, it is the challenges and the barriers to getting us there that this group needs to discuss and address. I think what our recommendation is, the steps in JADE allow us to speak to those challenges. So for example, if you were to literally take one of the boxes of JADE that refers to DER forecasting, and then the utilities can look at that box and say, here are the challenges associated with DER forecasting and better incorporating DER forecasting within the DSP process. All I'm saying is essentially to look at JADE on a step-by-step basis to say, what is the next set of challenges to tackle? We totally agree with you that, like, yes, let's focus on the challenges to tackle, the barriers to mitigate, but JADE just provides a framework and a lens with which we can say, let's tackle this box during this meeting. Let's have folks address all of these challenges here. In the next meeting, let's move on to the next box and the next set of challenges, and just using as an overall framework and guidepost for discussion in this meeting. But agree with your points wholeheartely.
But I think that's where the disconnect, because I don't think that we see all the boxes as being equally valuable. DER forecasting is, can we say 50% of the challenge? And I'm just using 50% because it's a nice round number. But what we're saying is, hey, we've got on those 10, 12 issues that the legislature identified, those are all really meaty topics. And that's where the challenges are that we need to spend the time to talk through. Changing what a prudency standard is, or not, I know I'm going to get in trouble with all the lawyers for saying that, and I don't mean actually changing the legal definition of prudency. I don't want to do that. But being able to talk about, hey, here is the challenge when you're talking about load forecasting. It's not load forecasting. This is a load letter. This is a specific thing. This is the guidance that we have to do our investments. That's a work group meeting. If we go through all the boxes, you're not going to get to the level of the detail in order to identify the challenges and implement the change. That's why we're really focused on that. And I apologize, Your Honor. I know I'm walking all over the
No, you're fine. And I think what Eli's saying, and I understand what the utilities are saying. I think we are all in some degree talking about the same things, but we may not be meshing together. So I'm not closing this off, but Jacob, Ethan, and then Mr. Virchinsky.
I'll say Pearl touched on a lot of what I was about to touch on. So.
Sorry. Okay. Ethan, do you have anything?
Pearl took care of it. Thank you.
All right.
Hands down.
Okay, Mr. Verchinsky.
Yeah, I would agree with where Eli and Al are coming from. And if you look at the charge that we were given, it's to look at the process. I understand where Pearl is coming from, but this is not a discussion about implementation. That's a whole different discussion. The question is, does the JADE process satisfy Maryland's needs? And if it doesn't, what needs to be changed? I mean, that is the germane question that is being asked by the commissioners. It's not how this is going to be implemented. What load forecasts do we need to do? What do we need to change? That is a whole different discussion, I think, in my opinion, at least based on the 3 items that I've read. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right. MEA posted in the chat, they agreed with OPC's comments and the use of the JADE roadmap. Ms. Lombardi notes that the first step of the roadmap is developing a consensus for stakeholder engagement and includes a discussion of relevant policy goals. And then she says this group can likely agree or at least discuss what the policies are relevant to the discussion, such as Climate Solutions Now Act, Empower, and Stride. I don't know if we want to touch on that one. I mean, I think the policy goals are pretty clearly set forth in 802, 7802. Unless anyone disagrees, let me know. All right, and then Samantha, I know I'm reading some of these comments. I know some folks may not be reading them. Samantha still having mic issues. She doesn't see how stepping through JADE boxes precludes discussions of challenges in meeting the legislative requirements. All right. All right. So I think in terms of the policy goals, is everyone on board that we're pretty much being driven by 7802? All right. So I see at least 2 people nodding. So that's and they're not nodding to falling asleep. They're nodding in agreement. All right. And staff agrees as well. All right. So to go back to where we started was a vision, and didn't get a ton of. Seems like folks agreed that we need one, or at least some folks did. So again, I'm going to put something up. It is purely a draft, and just to try and capture what Mr. Verchinsky and the utilities had included. So this is more just for discussion purposes. All right, can everybody see that?
Yes.
All right. Is that big? Do I need to make the whole screen? Otherwise, I can't see who's raising their hands, but I'll just make it the whole screen. All right. And I don't think it has to be so prescriptive. I mean, probably just a sentence or 2, maybe 3 should be enough for a vision statement in my mind. When I've got it on full screen, I can't see if anybody's raising their hands, but it's also, I can't see you if you're shaking your head at this.
Judge, this is Eli. Since you can't see raised hands, I'll just
okay. All right.
Does that work, or do you want to?
No, you're good. Please, no, okay. You're good.
Cool. No, thanks for this. I think this is a really great vision statement. Honestly, I think this incorporates.
And you don't have to say that to stroke my ego. It's fine if it sucks.
Well, we can kill 2 birds, you know. No, I think this is a really good starting point. The one thing that stands out as possibly missing from this would be, and I know it speaks to states' goals in that initial sentence, but one thing could be the distribution system planning process itself better incorporating state policy objectives. That would be the one, I think, additional kind of core piece here. But I think overall you're hitting on some of the key elements of distribution system planning. I think as long as we acknowledge that this obviously brief statement doesn't address every single element that should be tackled within this work group, then yeah, I think this is directionally the correct vision statement.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Jacob.
Yeah, Judge McLean. As I mentioned before, I believe the utilities have put forth, a vision statement around what we see as a climate-ready grid. And like I said, I can share kind of some of that language that we had kind of put forth before in some other documentation. So I can, during or after the meeting, share that with the team as well. That speaks to really, creating that safe, reliable, climate-ready grid to meet those state goals.
Okay. Yeah, and I will acknowledge that I stole a lot of what is in there. Kind of came from what Exxon had provided. Mr. Bartlett.
Yeah, thank you, Judge. Yeah, I think that this covers many of the bases. I guess maybe because I've worked on a lot of legislation, including PUA 7-802. I'm a little sensitive to words like endeavoring and attempt, whereas there's a shall in there for, of course, the things that the utilities must do and are doing, which is working to maintain safe, reliable, and affordable service. But there's the endeavoring to essentially modernize the grid and attempting to maximize use of DERs. I mean, I think those are shalls also, given the policy framework that we have.
Sure, and I recognize that, and I specifically thought about whether or not it should be a shall endeavor. But my thought was, they're required to do certain things by statute, and this, I don't know that a vision statement is necessarily going to. I don't think it's good. I tried to make it broad, but at the same time, if you start putting in, at least my thoughts, if you start putting in shalls and words making it mandatory, it just opens things up to so many different interpretations. But again, I recognize the concern. Jorge.
Good morning. Thank you for putting this up. Right, this is going to be an attempt to do some Monday morning quarterbacking. So, thank you for putting this up. This statement, I think it reflects that one of the things that we have spoken in the past, that distribution system planning cannot be looked into it as a silo. Distribution system planning is part of transmission planning. We need to have those touch points with transmission planning and IRP. So it's going to be almost impossible to supply all the needs just with distributed generation. So somehow we need to look also to the bulk power generators, right? We do know that Maryland already has some Calvert Cliffs. It doesn't contribute to carbon emissions. But the point that I'm trying to make is we cannot obviate, we cannot dismiss that there are going to be some touch points with integrated resource planning and how it is that we're going to be incorporating these bulk power generators into what we're doing, because it's going to be almost impossible to supply all with just distributed generation. So somehow we want to think about language into how we can ensure that distribution system planning is not viewed as a silo.
100%, 100%. Do you have any, initial feedback or suggestions for what we've got up there?
Right. So we will need to coordination. we need to come up with a process that we could coordinate with existing PJM transmission planning processes, with IRPs that may be developed by certain entities. We need to be able to reach out so those potential barriers, I mean, there's a demarcation that has been it has been the business as usual for many, many decades, and those demarcations are getting very the more permeable now. So it will be a functioning to reaching out to those folks to see how we can come up with something that will be more unified.
Okay.
So
All
that
right.
will be transmission planners, what is the transmission plan through the PJM process, what may be the IRP process through the different entities, and it will be a matter of getting on the table.
All right. Thank you, sir. Paul and then Jacob.
Yeah, I just want to make one comment on the JADE process. I mean, what we're doing is moving away from what the status quo is. And what's the difference from the status quo? And that is the CSNA. And that is why I tried to put a succinct vision statement in place. I mean, what's shown here is what the utilities are required to do. It's been required for years. So what are we doing different? And I think that, something shorter and, if you're going to do something longer like this, I would have to agree with Al that you need to change endeavor to shall if you go with something longer. That to me, the whole reason for doing this is we have a different state of affairs. And, we're going to have to do things differently. And, we still have to maintain the grid. The electrons need to flow. But what's the overarching change that we want to do that is no longer the status quo? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Jacob.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on Jorge's comments around the transmission planning bulk power system. Just want to recognize, the scope for this effort is around distribution system planning and making sure we're kind of staying within the scope of the effort here around specifically distribution system planning.
All right. Thanks, Jacob. Staff, in order to, they wanted a more general statement instead of the Climate Solutions Now Act, something more like all states' clean energy policies and objectives as they exist and into the future. So, all right. In terms of, let me stop presenting. Or are we at least done kind of cutting this up for now? What I could do is mark it up a bit based on our discussions and send it around. After the meeting, we could try and revisit it at the beginning of the next meeting, if that's acceptable to everyone.
Works.
Okay. All right. Then I will do that. Stop presenting. All right. Let's see. BGE's grant proposals. Ethan?
Let's see. First, let's see if I can get on video.
All right.
Am I?
Yes, sir.
Fantastic.
Let me find you just in case I gotta give you.
Okay. Now, first off, this is actually not just BGE, but I have worked for both companies, so I have a little bit of experience. with our activities on both sides. Let's see if I can actually turn on the slideshow. Okay. My apologies for my technical difficulties here, folks.
Take your time.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to start here if I can. Maybe not. There we go. Okay, learning a new system. Are we seeing a slide that says battery storage pilot projects?
Yes, sir.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, first, these are the battery storage pilot projects that both several Maryland utilities are a part of through the battery storage working group. The original one, which has been restarted for the new year. We'll be working more on that, but I wanted to start the conversation. I know we've got a lot of conversations going on here, but start a conversation about the kind of projects we're already working on, have in the ground, and these are non-wire solutions, really all of them, and how we think about use cases, because I felt that we felt that beginning to give people a framework to think about non-wire solutions and what's already out there would be helpful for framing the conversation going forward. So starting with battery storage pilot projects, these are just a sample. As PEPCO put together the Montgomery County Solar Bus Charging Microgrid. It was came in service in October of 2022. 1 megawatt, 3 megawatt hour battery. You can see up in the upper right-hand side of the screen the solar canopies involved in that project. Then there's the Elk Neck Virtual Power Plant. That's in DPL. It's in service in July of 2022 with 110 participants. And, it provides reliability to the residents who are participating and the surrounding area, as well as participates in PGM markets. And by the way, what I should have said about the solar bus charging microgrid is what it provides is resiliency for, in addition to decarbonizing the buses themselves and electrifying, the solar plus the battery provides resiliency for that fuel source then, that thereby making it work better, and then reduces the amount of other electrical heavy ups needed to support that the bus microgrid. And so, first we have a resiliency project designed to support EV charging for large vehicles. Then we have a reliability project that also layers on benefits by working in PGM markets. And then finally, we have the BG&E. We have a pair of battery systems working out in the Chesapeake Beach region. There's Chesapeake, which is already online. It came on in January. Point of pride for me. Fairhaven, which is scheduled to be energized in November. The area out there actually would have required underground circuits for backup to provide winter peaking support for the load there, because it is a non-gas area. They don't have gas heat, so in winter, that's when they have their highest peak loads. The two battery projects replace the need for 10 miles of underground circuit, and when they're not doing that, a few times a year they're called on the winter, they participate in PGM market operations. And these three all are examples of how we're using non-wire solutions in a layered manner. We build up those benefits, they have multiple purposes, and unlike a wire that just is there to do its wire, when it comes to non-wire solutions, we have to think in terms of multiple use cases. So I wanted to frame that out for you. And then I wanted to talk about a couple of our IIJA grant proposals. This is the, yes.
Very sorry to interrupt. Should we wait up till the end of the presentation to ask questions, or you rather have questions throughout?
I'll take a question now, Jorge. How you doing? You want
great,
to talk about the battery storage projects?
Very quick. No, this is very interesting, very cool. Thank you for sharing. So let's talk about the first two ones. So the activity in Montgomery County. So do you know if that microgrid is able to connect and disconnect back to the grid and then go back to synchronize to the grid?
It fits the definition of microgrid. Yes, it is capable of islanding and supporting itself for a certain amount of time. I'm not really certain what that is. With using the combination of the battery and the solar canopies you can see in the upper right.
So is it through like some kind of a microgrid controller that you're piloting?
There is a microgrid controller involved. I cannot speak to the developer off the top of my head.
Okay, good. All right. And then the other one was, okay, so DPL, are the participants talking directly to the utility, or are they going through an aggregator?
Hey, Jorge and Ethan, I know these are PHI projects and those are relatively in-depth questions. I think if there are detailed technical questions, we can absolutely follow up on those. I just want to make sure that since we didn't bring the engineering teams and the ops teams to support some of the detailed questions about the coordination and who owns what and the way that the aggregations work, I want to make sure that we're not putting anything on the record, which is our best guess with the subject to check, and then we have to walk it back and everybody gets confused. So if there are questions that are more detailed, we can certainly keep track of those and bring them forward in the next meeting. I also don't want Ethan to be on the spot for answering for Pepco and Delmarva engineering questions, which I don't even want to do that, and I work for both of these companies, and so just tag in if they're detailed questions, we can certainly follow up.
And to Pearl's point, Jorge, I was going to take that as a question to relay to my counterpart over at PHI.
All right, guys.
About the aggregation.
That worked. Thank you.
No problem. Well, let's see if I can get back to that screen effectively. Okay. Okay, now the IIJA grant proposals, and these represent more ideas about use cases that we are thinking about. That's why we propose them for DOE grant funding. And so there's the Pepco Fairmont microgrid. Yes, it is a fully functioning, it is a microgrid. It can, it has islanding capability. It's comprised of a battery energy storage system and a DC distribution system supported by a community solar, 6 single-family homes with rooftop solar, can participate in the developer's community solar program. The BESS and distribution system will be owned by Pepco, while the photovoltaic is owned by the microgrid developer. It couples with the bulk power grid, and it demonstrates the ability to increase hosting capacity to help solve hosting capacity constraints, as well as, this is targeted towards first-time LMI home buyers, providing them with energy efficient housing. So, this is the kind of use case that we're looking at for the future.
Hey, Ethan, do you have an idea what the ballpark price tag is for the microgrid that you were just talking about? I was just curious.
I will take that one back as well.
It's not a huge deal. Just wonder what a microgrid for 6 houses would run. That's all.
And microgrid cost. My experience with it is that having priced a few, you have the battery and the microgrid controllers. The microgrid controllers are a definite adder, but they're not. It's the battery and the real estate are going to be your big items.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, and we'll take that question back, Judge McLean, and follow up.
That was purely just curiosity on my part.
Understandable.
So really quick, Judge, and this in regards to process. I know that this has been recorded, but Ethan is not testifying, right? So we can have more of a discussion, like open discussion.
That's the whole point of the work group. Yeah, this whole process should be open. Yeah, nobody's testifying or getting cross-examined, and we're not going to hold Ethan's feet to the fire in a hearing 2 years from now what he said today.
I appreciate that. The other project we wanted to highlight, this was one that I worked on. It's called Advancing a Just and Equitable Transformation for a Resilient and Cleaner Grid of the Future in Baltimore. We just call it JET for simplification. It proposes to invest $125 million in Baltimore over 5 years, beginning with, and you can see on this map, those green lines. Those are the remaining 4 kV vintage infrastructure left in Baltimore. 4 kV is an older technology. It's very reliable, but it does not accommodate modern technology as well, distributed energy resources, sensors, nor is it as capable of maintaining load as 13 kV. So first part of that project was to accelerate and finalize those 4 to 13 kV conversions, which serve 8 disadvantaged communities. Which is one of the things that we've noted is that load growth happens largely in places where there's growth. When there's been traditional redlining, load growth is lower. That leads to a equity issue, which we identified here, that the communities that were already historically redlined, their growth is limited, and therefore they don't get the modern infrastructure that other groups would. An equity issue that I think is important to highlight. So the second part is, you'll notice the red box, that's the Calverton substation area. We noted that in line with the idea of equity, we felt that it would be important to then show that these areas who are most vulnerable, our LMI customers are most vulnerable, and the same idea goes for the previous project I showed you. They're most vulnerable to climate change, so bringing them these kinds of resiliency projects early helps solve the equity problem. And so the second part of JET is to develop a community microgrid serving these 2 communities, Penrose, Fayette Street, Outreach, and Shipley Hill. And, you know, I'm going to stop presenting now, but I'm probably presenting my broke screen. But we just wanted to bring these projects forward to show you that while we're thinking about non-wire solutions and we have use cases, we're also thinking about new ways to do them. And so just wanted to start framing that out, get people thinking about how non-wire solutions work and how the utilities are thinking about them. I hope this presentation has been helpful to anyone. Any more questions?
Yeah, David. And then Al.
Yeah, just a real quick question. And I see and I know, Pearl, I'm not going to ask detailed engineering questions here, but what has to do with the that ElkNet, pilot and possibly other possible ones. I don't know why my screen's not working, but the issue is, has there been looked at other distributed storage type of pilots, similar to the ones like Green Mountain Power, where they bring your own device type of storage, and where then the utility can then use that as an extra means to do a non-wires alternative? Has that been considered?
Hey, David. That is exactly the kind of thing that we're considering these days, and trying to find where the use cases are and how we would handle subscription of a bring your own device. These are actually exactly the kind of questions we're asking right now, and thank you for bringing that to people's attention.
Mr. Bartlett? Or I'm sorry, David, were you done, sir?
I am, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Judge. Yeah, and thanks, Ethan. These are all interesting projects. They raise a couple of questions that take us maybe back to the process that we're engaged in, the DS planning process. So the first one is, how are we going to learn from these pilots? I mean, I think that you all are, but for example, there was another pilot battery energy storage program planned in Prince George's County, and I think there's some important lessons there learned about something this group needs to really be thinking about, which is stakeholder engagement. I think there were some limitations on stakeholder engagement there, and they, I think, have affected the way thinking about that project has gone. So that's one thing that there are all these lessons that I think it's important to extract and bring to the group, because they are part of our mandate. The other is this question about timeline and the connection to the overall process. So, and these pilots will take a few years, I suppose. I think as Paul has pointed out in the past, when we do, there is substantial experience from other states and maybe even within the state on some of these areas of VPPs and distributed energy planning and battery storage. And so we do have 2031 and 2045 clean energy and greenhouse gas reduction goals. So I just wanted to get a sense of how you all connect the pilots and their outcomes to further planning, because that's the subject matter of this group.
I would definitely say that these are ways that we are looking at to align our planning with state goals, both resiliency and clean energy. For instance, the JET project brings resiliency to disadvantaged communities. And one of the ways it does that is it has a part of the grant is bringing in solar development into that area and supporting it on having a third party owner that then they're tied to the microgrid battery owned by the utility. The battery and the community solar in the area together provide that resiliency. And that's where that is where it ties into this working group. We're looking at these as ways of both pursuing state goals and providing for solutions to our customers. And so, that is kind of the heart of distribution system planning from my point of view.
And to real quick add to kind of what Ethan was saying, we're driving towards a climate ready grid, and we see these non-wire solutions as kind of Ethan walked through of like really just tools in our toolboxes to address system constraints and being able to use them as projects. And so these pilots are opportunities for us to take learnings from that and inform how we use those tools and those solutions as we're really driving towards that climate ready grid. And to one of your original question, and I am by no means the expert on this, so someone can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe there is a lessons learned filing as it relates to that pilot working group coming up in November. Someone can correct me on that one, but I believe that there will be a filing for the lessons learned for the pilots.
Yes, November 15th, and I am hard at work on it already.
Is that the Livingston Road project?
It will be all of the pilot projects. I just went over a sampling of them here. There are numerous ones that will be lessons learned discussed in the new storage working group.
We had a couple hands up. Anybody? Oh, Eli, I'm sorry.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to follow up on the statement that I think Jacob made just now. You mentioned that the utilities are viewing these non-wire solutions as one tool in the toolbox. Can you explain what the process is today to consider a non-wire solution as opposed to a traditional distribution system planning investment? How is an NWS process reflected within DSP?
I think that is something that, if you would like, Ron brought this up last time from your team, Eli, and then when you were going to submit questions about it, we were happy to do a presentation on our full non-wire solutions planning process, but it's a little, that would be something a little, it is a tool in our toolbox, but it is one we consider. We would like to do a full presentation on that if that's where we would go, rather than just speak to it off the cuff.
So it sounds like it's not a standard part of distribution system planning.
It is a standard part of distribution system planning, and but we would like to, we've done testimony in our MYPs on it. We've spoken to this a lot. We would like to speak to it and help people understand that we are considering battery storage and other non-wire solutions, and we're also looking forward, was the takeaway we're hoping you got from the presentation I just made, is that we already have these considerations, and we are now considering new other concepts.
And to add to that, Ethan, I think I would point back to phase one. I was not part of phase one, but my understanding, kind of reviewing some of that, is as we were outlining our existing processes and discussing that, that was part of that discussion there as well. So I believe it's already kind of been discussed of how those are incorporated in the distribution planning process.
Thanks. I will go back and review some of the NWS discussion from phase one. Appreciate it.
Thank you, gentlemen. Anybody else?
Yeah, this is Paul Verchensky.
Yes, sir.
I'm always interested in pilots because they are good teaching lessons. However, I think when you're talking about implementation, it's beyond the scope of what we are discussing here. Namely, the JADE process itself. Is it relevant? What needs to be changed? You're talking about implementation measures, which may or may not be something that this group wants to go into after we agree on whatever the boxes are in this process. So I'm concerned that we're kind of expanding the scope of what we're being asked to do, and I'm always cognizant of scope creep because that can get you into trouble, and I think that's what's happening here. So my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That's a good point. Certainly don't want to take off more than we can chew, or bite off more than we can chew, and go beyond what the commission anticipates, because we don't have a ton of time to do that anyway. All right. Yes, sir, Mr. Cathan.
It's actually me. We're at the potential being scope creep. It's really a question. If you look at the J process, it talks about distribution system planning as part. It has to be incorporated with bulk system planning. And so my question is more of an issue of how these storage pilots, are they being anticipated to provide potentially bulk system value? Are they protected to participate in the PGM wholesale markets? I just had some point of a question, as opposed to any sense that I'm asking for, that you're changing your policy or anything.
Yes, David. Both the BG&E battery storage projects and the Elk Neck VPP are participating in PJM.
All right, thank you.
All right. Anyone else? DeAndre, why don't you just... All right, got a question from staff. Of the existing storage, battery storage pilot projects, how many have been in operation long enough to gather sufficient data to make decisive decisions on the direction of storage in Exelon's DSP process? That's a question. If anybody, it's in the chat.
DeAndre, would you mind if I deferred for our November 15th filing, and before that's a big question.
Sure. No problem. No problem at all. All right. Any other questions for Ethan or Jacob on the storage issues or storage proposals that they have going on? All right. Thank you very much. All right. All right. The last thing I had on my agenda is, again, we're going back to the JADE process map. I know that's everyone's favorite subject, and we already have we already touched on that a little bit. And I pulled up the order while we were having, while Ethan was speaking, and it certainly seems as if the commission wants us to develop modifications to the JADE process map to suit Maryland utilities, and that's at 8 on page 8 of the order. Again, I don't want to be so boxed into this roadmap that we get bogged down and we can't accomplish anything. So I think we need to go in with the mindset that we should be looking at the JADE process map and how it can be changed to fit the utilities, with the understanding that it may not be the same for SMECO and PE versus the Exelon utilities. And I think and again, this may just be naive on my part, I think we may be able to do it just looking at the policy goals set forth in 7802 as we go through and, hit the first box or two. Am I being unrealistic? Am I missing something? I mean, I know everyone's not going to agree on this.
Just to clarify, Judge McLean.
Yes.
Are you saying work through the policy goals as kind of the topics in conversation, and then just in those conversations connect them back to the JADE process map?
That's kind of what I was thinking, at least after going through everyone's comments. And I think you probably put it more succinctly than I had put it out there. But yeah, do you have any thoughts on that? Or
yeah, I mean, I think, framing the discussion around those policy
Right.
goals, right, and really driving towards the solutions and challenges within them.
Right.
And I think, as we were discussing even earlier, we were coming to that point of that's what we're all trying to solve. It's just, how do you frame it? And I think, as you said there, I think it makes sense to frame it around the policy goals, and then within those discussions, bring it back as necessary to the process map.
Okay. All right. All right. So any thoughts on this? Yes, sir. Mr. Bartlett.
Yeah, thank you, Judge. Sorry, I don't mean to talk too much, but just in looking at that, at the order as you were looking at it, it does also specifically talk about something that is one of the very, very first steps in the JADE process, which is defining approaches to stakeholder engagement. And that's why I raised that in relation to the battery storage program, because it's something that we perhaps haven't paid enough attention to. And what do we mean by stakeholders? It's not just those of us on this working group who don't happen to be utilities, but really folks in communities that are affected, and other groups that will be affected or have interest in the outcomes of this process we're working on. So I think I wanted to flag that as an area that we haven't talked about very much, but it's actually almost step one.
Oh, yeah, agreed 100%. And I think we'll definitely get to the stakeholder engagement, because it's not only set forth in the policy or in the statute, but also the commission definitely foot stomped it in the order. And just, I know, I think stakeholder engagement is probably one of the latter elements in the statute, but I don't know if that's something we should. Do we have thoughts on whether we should address that first, last? I mean, again, I'm not trying to dissuade the importance of stakeholder engagement. Yes, sir, Mr. Verchinsky.
Stakeholder engagement, I've got some real interaction with that over some 25 years. And unless people understand what the process is and specific points are identified for stakeholder engagement, the general one that I've seen that people try to do is, well, you can comment anywhere in the process. That just does not work unless people are brought up and into discussion at specific points. That never, ever works. I've seen it happen both ways. And the latter one that I'm bringing up is the one that has worked for at least transportation planning, which I'm most familiar with. I would say that stakeholder engagement needs to be front and center, but it's only after you define what the process is and what the boxes are in your process. And I still keep coming back to that because we haven't agreed that the JADE process itself is everything's there or some things should be deleted. I mean, it's, you know, it's amorphous at this point for anybody who's a stakeholder. Thank you.
Sure. Well, I know that's the this JADE process map that we all love so dearly. I mean, one of the things is we're supposed to do is modify it, and you know, we got limited comments on it. I mean, we could probably spend several meetings trying to agree what applies, what doesn't, how it should be changed. I think it just, me personally, again, this may be me being naive, I think it might be, rather than going through the entire thing for several meetings, why can't we just kind of change it as we go or as needed? Mr. Verchinsky, do you have a thought on that?
The boxes themselves are fairly specific, and I think we could run through those. I think trying to point policy goals toward various boxes is not an efficient use of our time, at least from my standpoint. You know, we've got something specific that's very specific right now that's out there. And we could say, yeah, we agree, or we've got this stuff missing, or we need another box for whatever reason. So that's kind of my 2 cents on this one.
So you think we need to do that before? And again, I'm not saying that's a good or a bad idea, but that's my understanding. Your suggestion, sir.
Yeah, it's you know, what is, if you can't agree on the process up front, then where do you point the various policy goals to? I mean, then everything becomes a blob, in my opinion.
Go ahead, Jacob.
Yeah, I was just gonna kind of add, Judge McLean. I think in terms of that stakeholder engagement, whether it's upfront or, I think it makes sense kind of also as something that's discussed as we're going through those policy goals. I know, you know, we're currently working on that straw proposal to bring to the group around that long-term study. And in that kind of, you know, study, we had talked about stakeholder engagement and where it would fit within that concept. So just thinking through it kind of as it applies further on, I think there's opportunities for us as we're identifying those challenges and working through the solutions for those challenges, being able to incorporate that just naturally as part of that discussion.
All right. Thank you. I guess one of the challenges I'm already seeing is, you know, we create an agenda and try and hit a couple things, but the comments we get, what I get back are somewhat limited. And my fear is if we try and do this, try and change this JADE roadmap, like, hey, we're not going to agree, and that's fine. But there's got to be more input from everyone. Again, I know everyone's busy, but if we want to try and make some headway, because we just haven't really accomplished a lot thus far, you know, everyone's got to weigh in. It can't be get a handful of comments and none with huge suggestions on this is what should be changed in the map. You know, we need to delete this, keep this, get rid of, change this. You know, these meetings aren't going to be helpful, and we're not going to get to where we need to go. You know, and with that said, I'm happy to spend more time discussing this. I mean, happy is kind of in quotes, because obviously I know there's differences of opinion on how we should use it. But right now we're treading water, and you know, and we just need to make some movement forward. You know, these work groups work if everyone participates. And right now, you have to submit written comments in advance of these meetings to let parties know where you stand, so they can respond accordingly during the meeting. Otherwise, we're not going to get anywhere. Does anybody have anything to add on that front? Yes, sir, Jacob.
I guess just throwing out a suggestion, would it be helpful recognizing, kind of looking at your agenda and section 5, it's got a lot there. That's obviously more than one meeting's worth of topics, right? Is it worth trying to identify the first 3 to 5 that we want to try and capture in one meeting? And so that way everyone's aligned on the specific topics we're going to be discussing and can come prepared to discuss those specific pieces.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely. I think you're getting ahead of me a little bit, because that's kind of what I was thinking moving forward. But if we are stuck on the roadmap, I don't know if we need to. I'd hate to start diving into those elements before we've at least tried to address the modifications of the map. Yes, sir, Mr. Bartlett.
Yeah, thanks, Judge. So, I mean, it seems to me that if we agree, and since it is part of the order, to enter the JADE process, and for example, as we start into it, we will find places where it works well for us, and we will find places where maybe it needs to be modified. But rather than do it theoretically, just looking at it as a process, but rather going into it and dealing with the pieces as they come up, I think that will allow us to be flexible, to respond to the request for modification, and also to move forward. And it does incorporate a lot of things that are in your agenda item 5, but it does it within a framework as opposed to having them be one-off each at a time.
Okay.
Because in the end, we're going to have to come up with a coherent process recommendation.
Okay, so kind of change it as we go, so to speak.
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
Okay. I mean, I like that idea. Like kind of what I think Jacob and I were talking about. I know, again, I think that's probably the best use of our time. I know not everyone agrees on that approach, but I think that might be, at least for the time being, the best way forward. So I guess as we move forward, if I don't say it in an agenda note, please keep in the back of your mind any changes to this process map that you believe need to be made. All right. Yes.
I'm sorry. Could I just add that?
Please.
I agree with, I think, Jacob's proposal that, as we go to each meeting, we define which of the things we're going to be talking about in that meeting, then people can come prepared. There is potentially experience or technical knowledge that can be brought to that discussion because we know we're going to have it. And then we can use that as a framework for talking about what is being proposed and what the process, the DSPR process might include on that specific topic.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think we're all on the same page, I guess. So do we want to go, I don't know if I want to say take a couple of the policy goals set forth in the statute, or take a couple of the boxes in this process map. I don't know which one's better. Or
I would say, I think I was kind of describing it as well, as if we take each of those policy pieces, we can then talk through that. But then as we're talking through that, walk through the roadmap with that piece and have that discussion as we're going through each policy piece. So we're hitting the policy goals, but still hitting the process map as we're kind of walking through each policy.
Okay. That sounds like a good idea. Eli.
Yeah, and I'll try not to beat a dead horse here, but I will reiterate that I do think just following the JADE process map as opposed to the policy goals one by one is likely to be a lot more productive for this work group. My concern in looking at the policy goals, for example, is that there is, I would argue, very significant overlap among a lot of them. For example, if you had a meeting dedicated towards energy efficiency, but that meeting does not also factor in goal number, 9, demand response, it's going to be, a bit duplicative to have a meeting focused on energy efficiency and then 1 month later come back and do one on demand response and non-wire solutions. I think a lot of these specific stated policy goals have significant overlap such that it's just not going to result in a particularly productive work group meeting. And I would argue that if we, again, go through the boxes in the JADE roadmap within a specific maybe list of questions going into each meeting or a specific objective of what we're setting out to achieve in each meeting, and perhaps that objective is how does the process map in this specific box or these specific boxes need to be modified in order to better fit a future DSP framework within Maryland. My inclination is that is just from a pure procedural standpoint going to allow us to have more fruitful discussions here. I understand the point that the utilities brought up about perhaps some boxes within the JADE roadmap being less relevant. Totally happy to listen to utility proposals for which boxes of JADE we shouldn't spend time on here. But I think for the most part, all or most of the boxes are going to have a significant impact or should have a significant impact on distribution system planning. And the roadmap just provides a framework by which this group can have productive discussions. So I would just recommend that in terms of just a procedural process to get us towards something productive. I think just like thinking about what, I don't know that we've landed on any, and perhaps the main purpose of this meeting is to get aligned on what the process is for the next 8 months or so. And if so, that's a great objective. But I think what we're losing by not having a clear objective in each of these meetings is not understanding what each meeting is driving towards. For example, like I'm thankful for the utility presentations on their pilots, but I'm not clear what the purpose of those presentations serves for this work group's purpose. I'm not sure how hearing those presentations results in us being able to make recommendations about how to modify DSP processes in Maryland. And I think that's the big concern, is that if we don't have clear objectives and process that govern this work group, then each meeting will just result in discussion without specific output.
All right. So Eli, under your proposal, you would say, let's do the goals and objectives and DER forecasts. Is that in one meeting? Is that fair to say?
I guess the way I would look at it is I would look at each step of the JADE roadmap. So, and we put this in our comments. And so like the first step refers to developing guidance and rules for an entire DSP process. First of all, that in and of itself is a pretty robust ask. And so I think could span a meeting or potentially more. But within that first step is also defining stakeholder engagement opportunities. And I think what we need I think the best approach would be to take boxes of the JADE roadmap, make a suggestion that X meeting will cover boxes A, B, and C, and we'll ask these questions, and that we literally start from step 1 of the JADE map and then move through each step.
Right. And I don't necessarily disagree with that, but okay. So the first one, develop guidance or rules for the whole process. I mean, what are you envisioning? I mean, we can't even agree on what this map looks like now, but what you want to develop, we want to spend time developing rules for the entire process. I
guess with respect to that one, I'm thinking of like an annual distribution system planning process, a stakeholder involved, DER centric, utility led process that is, that provides requirements for what the utilities are required to file and how the utilities are required to engage with stakeholders as it relates to their annual distribution system planning. my understanding is right now there isn't like any type of annual DSP filing or report, but I think that type of framework would create avenues for stakeholder engagement. It would create avenues by which utilities are required to submit filings that clarify the grid needs they've identified in the system, the solutions they've considered to mitigate those grid needs, and the ultimate decision made on which solution to deploy to mitigate those grid needs. And so I think that could be an element of a DSP process. If we ultimately think that is biting off more than we can chew on day one, understood. And I don't know if I disagree with that notion, because that is certainly complex. And maybe that piece comes later. But I think we need to figure out what order we're going to use, but we just need to be hitting on each of these boxes in order to figure out what a modified DSP framework looks like.
Right. I think I think I agree on your last point. I think it is too much, that particular box. That's something I would envision being handled after we file our reports and when we're developing regulations. That box alone, I think, envisions the entire regulatory drafting regulations. And I think
that might be very reasonable.
That will take months and months and months. And so, okay, so I don't want to say we can get rid of that box, but maybe move that towards the end. So in the stakeholder engagement, and I don't know if it was Jacob or one of the other individuals indicated that might be something that we discuss throughout. Again, keeping in mind any modifications. So we want to make to this. I think this, rather than trying to nail down each stage where stakeholders can engage and the best opportunities to do that, I think it makes more sense to do it as we go for each box. But again,
yeah, and that's another thing that will certainly be informed by what the rules for the whole process is, right? Without having clarity on what the entirety of the process looks like, it's a little bit difficult to understand when it will be reasonable for stakeholders to participate. I don't know that it's unachievable. For example, I think you can look at step 2 of the JADE process map, which is DER forecasting in one box and load forecasting in the other box. And you can say, how should stakeholders be engaged within the DER forecasting process? Is there an opportunity?
Agreed 100%. Yeah. Agree 100%. All right.
So I think we can, I think that's a great starting point. And I think we can probably tackle stakeholder engagement under each of these boxes individually. But then I think what I might recommend, and what I think you started to get at, Judge, is towards the end, we need to come up with overarching processes that guide the entire thing. And then within that, maybe we kind of revisit what we had initially discussed in terms of stakeholder engagement and say, okay, does this initial approach fit within this ultimate process that we land on? So I think we're on the same page in terms of that general approach.
All right. Jacob, and then Samantha.
Yeah, so I just want to kind of chime in, and Eli, I think you bring up a lot of important things around, making sure we're, having understanding of what's coming next, right? That was a big thing that you're kind of driving at there. And I think by working through some of those policy goals, we will know what's coming next. And I think one of Al's key points, I think, was a really great point, was being able to make sure we're having the right technical knowledge on the conversations for those policy points, right? And if we're going block by block, I think, we're already seeing that some of these policies stream across all the blocks that we're looking at, right? And so if we're talking block by block, we're not necessarily kind of having that clarity of what technical knowledge might be needed for the next conversation, because these policy goals and the pieces within them are flowing across all these blocks, right? So if we focus the conversation on the policy goals and kind of the technology behind them, we're able to have the right voices in the room for that conversation, and then still go through and connect it back to the JADE process map and the boxes, right? And I think, yes, there may be some overlap, going back, revisiting topics or revisiting boxes, but it's a chance for us to create efficiencies as we're going, right? As we're revisiting a box, we'll have already talked about some of it, and so that conversation will be a little bit quicker when we revisit that box. So I think bringing it in mainly on the policy pieces, and that stuff really allows us to focus, bring the right voices to the conversation, and still connect back to that process map, but ultimately really drive to the changes within the DSP process that we're looking for.
Thank you, sir. Samantha.
Thank you. I wanted to echo a lot of what Eli said, and as we've been saying, I guess second that. I'm looking. I have the JADE process map document pulled up in front of me right now. I'm looking at it, and I agree, with your point, Judge, that this is a lot to bite off initially. Meaning, the very first step here is to develop guidance or rules for the planning process to be used by all utilities. I mean, I do think that's the ultimate goal of this group. That said, totally recognize that that's a big question, right? And to just get into like one level of detail deeper, what that looks like, or, what that would mean is that we want, as a group, or, maybe the way this works is utilities come with a proposal and we discuss it, is we want to define what are the time horizons that we're looking at here for forecasting and planning. What's the level of granularity? What kinds of scenarios are utilities looking at in the planning process? What kind of data are they using? Those types of questions. And so, again, that is a lot to bite off, but I think it makes sense to me just logically that that's the right place to start. Is we all need to align on what this overall process is going to look like. And then from there, to Eli's point, where are the places where we as stakeholders can, opine or offer recommendations, alternatives, etc. And then the related to all of this, the last thing I wanted to mention or suggest is that, a lot of other states have gone through this process before, and I think there are some lessons learned there undoubtedly about where to start and how to approach biting off this this big piece. So I wanted to offer as a recommendation that we could as a group look into presentations or sort of technical assistance from some of the national labs who do this kind of work, things along those lines, to do a little bit of benchmarking to help us answer the question, other states who've done this, how have they started, or where have they started? How have they dealt with some of the challenges we're dealing with? I think we keep using DER forecasting as an example of one of those challenges. But again, I think there are some lessons to be learned from other states. Thanks.
Right. Thank you, Samantha. And in response to that, the commission's supposed to be holding a technical conference sometime in the next couple months, hopefully sooner rather than later, so we don't have to retread a lot of the ground that we're going over now. So Ronald and then Ethan.
Yeah, I just supportive of what Eli was saying earlier and the structure that the JADE process brings. I just have to note, with all due respect, I think the process that Jacob laid out, I have no idea what the utilities would be bringing or how any of that would connect to their planning processes or any actions that could be taken from that. And I really would be concerned with listening to a bunch of presentations that are not structured and ending in a place at the end where we are not clear on how these policy goals are mapping to planning or how they're really pulling into outputs from the worker.
So I'm going to have to disagree with Ron there. We're trying to discuss how we are incorporating state goals into our planning. That was the point of the presentation I just gave. Some of our non-wire solutions that are already proposed or are in the ground. These are the kind of things we're learning from. They align with state policy goals in many ways. And Ron, I believe you asked about what we were doing last meeting. And, I had actually put that together in response to agenda item 3BII. or yes, 3BII, and it was a throwback presentation. What, you know, we don't want to get bogged down in is the OPC team seems to be taking us back to the beginning of this process where we've already discussed the JADE roadmap. The commission has ruled on the JADE roadmap, and I don't see where going back to the JADE roadmap is relevant when we have the CSNA with clear state objectives that we need to be discussing. I personally found Chuck's agenda to be right on and getting us to where we were going. But going back to the JADE roadmap and asking the utilities to conform our processes to what NASIO and NARUC refer to themselves as a idealized flow chart, it just seems, you know, it doesn't seem to take into account the entire year of conversation we had last year. So I hope that we can move forward. The EU utilities are about to put forward a straw man proposal for stakeholder engagement, for incorporation of stakeholder engagement, and for how a DSP process might work. We would like to move the ball in the conversation to the next stage, and that was what Chuck asked us to do last time, and we are prepared to speak to at the next meeting. And unfortunately, that will involve a presentation, and I hope you find it helpful.
Just to be clear, Ethan, that my comment wasn't on your presentation earlier. Also, my understanding of last year in the first phase was getting a sense of, or the utility is saying what they currently do. It didn't map to the JADE roadmap, but you can correct me there. I know. Are you saying that you currently, I guess, do you have a response to that?
We all submitted comments on the JADE roadmap. They're in the status report from the last, and we all
okay. So that's what you mean. You submitted one set of comments on the JADE roadmap.
Well, we discussed them.
That was not the whole process of phase one, correct?
I'm not on the witness stand, so.
Hey, Ethan, before I let you go there, the straw man proposals, can you give just a very broad overview of what these proposals are going to look like, and what you're touching on?
We expect to give it a full process for incorporation of state goals, a straw man for how we would incorporate state goals, points of stakeholder involvement. We'd like to discuss, broad overarching principles for that, and a process that everyone can use to understand how utilities are planning in the long term to meet state policy goals is our general overview.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. And when you say straw man, I'm sorry, I envision that is more of a neutral view, but this is kind of a more or less a utility draft, so to speak.
It's an outline of how we think a process could work. We're looking, stage one of this process is to get feedback from this group. That's what we want to hear, is their feedback on, we're just putting out an idea of what we think would work given what we know about the various, how the things work technically in our distribution system planning, how long-term planning works, incorporating comments that we've heard in the previous phase and in the status report comments. We tried to build a framework that we hope people can work from and help us define what stakeholders are at each stage, what kinds of input and feedback. One of the things I really liked from the OPC response that we looked at was from last Thursday was the incorporation of utility responses to feedback, what we're incorporating, why and why not. There are good ideas at this table, and I want to get to those ideas and not get bogged down in the JADE roadmap.
All right. Jacob, you still got your camera on. You got anything? Oh, Eli.
Yes. I wanted to push back a little bit about the point that Ethan made, that the JADE roadmap has been ruled on and should not be revisited. Looking at page 8 of the order launching this phase of the work group, it explicitly says in developing modifications to the JADE process map to suit Maryland utilities. So just stopping there, that is explicitly saying that this work group is directed to develop modifications to the JADE process map. So in developing those modifications, the work group should ensure that the resulting DSP recommendations address the policy goals set forth in PUA 7802. That is all we are suggesting with our process, and that we use the JADE roadmap as a framework to move through discussions in these meetings. I want to go back to a point that Pearl made earlier that we agree with. Within each of those boxes, the discussion should focus on the challenges associated with, hitting this idealized, stylized JADE version. We recognize that JADE is not going to be 100% implementable, and that's not what we're trying to do here. We are instead trying to look at each box within JADE and understand what are the challenges that utilities face, what can reasonably be changed, and on what time frame can utilities start to make modifications to the DSP process, right? What can we accomplish in the next 5 years? What provides us barriers such that we can't accomplish it for 10 or 15 years from now? And we're not, I think the order explicitly directs us to develop modifications to the JADE process map. So I think by using that as the basis for guiding the meetings here is actually doing exactly what the commission ordered this work group to do, and is not duplicative of phase one. If I can finish, the report, that came out at the end of phase one stated that that JADE is basically totally fits within the utilities process today, and it's great. The reality is it's not. The commission's order launching the second phase of the work group highlights all of the comments that were filed, on that report. Many of the commenters noted that they disagree with the report's notion that JADE is already mapped well to the utilities. There's consensus among many parties, not all the parties, that the utility process today does not fit within JADE. And given that it was the order's explicit request that we develop modifications to the JADE process map, that just seems like a pretty good place in terms of structuring each of these meetings going forward. I'll pause there.
Okay, thank you, Eli, and I appreciate that clarification. The penultimate paragraph of your the JADE roadmap comments you said submitted last Thursday stated that we should be conforming utility DSP to the JADE roadmap, and we went to exactly the same commission order you did, directive that you did, and saw it from our point of view. And I appreciate your clarification that this is about building a JADE roadmap modifications that can lead us to the Clean Energy Act now goals, which is what we consider the most important part of this, is working towards aligning utility DSP with the state. And so I think we are talking about the same thing from different points of view. I appreciate you clarifying that.
And I'll just add a clarification, if you don't mind, Judge McLean, that I agree. I think we're looking to address what the order is saying and make modifications to the JADE process map, as well as addressing the state goals, policy goals as outlined in Climate Solutions Now Act. I think really just identifying that. I think the best way to go through it would be to go through it by the kind of working through agenda point 5 and all the points within that, and really using those as the anchor points to drive the discussion, and then allowing that to feed back to the stakeholders and what modifications to the process map may be. Because I think even in the discussion before, Eli and the judges, you're talking through that first box, showing that like so much of that starts to go through the whole process. And I think all these boxes, overlap with so much of each other, as well as all these policy goals. I think if we anchor on the policy goals, it gives us, as I think we're all trying to accomplish, a way to work through each of these topics in a straightforward, focused manner that allows us to address the policy goals, talk through what changes and modifications there may be.
Okay. All right, Mr. Bartlett.
Yeah, despite the degree of some disagreement, I actually think we're working towards a potentially fruitful path. I don't take the Jade map modification as the end game of this working group. The end game is coming up with a distribution system planning process. And so seeing the presentation that Ethan's talking about, where apparently many of the things, including Jade and the requirements of 7-802 have been taken into consideration, sure, let's look at that. What we should do is keep going back to the Jade map and saying, have we missed some key step? For example, the stakeholder engagement or the time horizon. For example, we have not agreed on a time horizon for our planning process, and we need to do that. And at one point, I know the utilities have proposed a nesting process with a longer term, but I don't know how far out long term is. A longer term goal, a 3-year process, roughly 3 years, which coincides with the MYPs, and then annual implementation plans, essentially. And so if that's in the proposal, then we can talk about time horizons. When you get to what the OPC calls step 2, then we're right into the same items that are in agenda item 5. That is, if you look at it, it includes DERs and electrification and electric vehicle forecasting and storage, and so on. And so I don't think that we're really disagreeing about the fact that we need to deal with these pieces. And I really appreciate the idea that just from the discussion we've had, it makes sense to say that the stakeholder engagement actually is better talked about when we talk about some of these specific elements. So I think we're actually edging towards a balanced approach, where Jade has a role, and we can fulfill the task of modifying Jade, but some of the pieces in there may not be things we need to spend a lot of time on. Some of them are things we haven't spent any time on, and we should. So it becomes a reference point, as do the items in 7-802, which are actually incorporated in Jade. So I think we can make it work without, unless we tie ourselves in knots.
What would make you say that? All right. All right. Anybody else? It sounds kind of like we're on the same page. We have different opinions on how to get there, though. Anybody else? All right. Well, there's pros and cons. I can see on both sides of the coin in terms of how best to proceed. And obviously, whatever we decide, someone's not going to be happy. But why don't we at least try? And if it doesn't work, we can always change it back. Why don't we start with the roadmap and try to address a couple blocks each meeting, and have folks identify, in addition to identifying the things that they believe are applicable in the blocks, to identify what state policy would fit into that block. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. I would, since the utilities have put a fair amount of work into doing what they think is compatible with Jade and touches on many of the elements that we need to talk about, I think it would probably be worth seeing that presentation, but using, again, the Jade and state-of-the-art technical knowledge and experience from other states as a way of evaluating what they present rather than just, talking about it. And I did want to make the point that it is good that some of the things that we're being shown align with the state goals, but the question really is as proposed, will they achieve the state goals? Those are two different things. And so that should be our standard for looking at it. But still, I think because the work's been put in, before we go into Jade Block 1, I think hearing the utilities proposal would be a good thing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We definitely want to hear the proposal. And that's fine. And when I say Jade Block 1, I'm talking about the considerations feeding into the types of projections and goals, and the second would be goals and objectives. I'm not worried about those top two. And again, I think the define and use of consistent metrics, that'll come, as we go, and will result from the regulations we ultimately agree upon. So, Ethan, if I go back to you, how long do you what's your proposal? Time what's the time of your proposal? Is it going to be lengthy? And that's fine if it is.
Pardon as I struggle with my various tabs.
You're fine, sir.
It is a 2-pager.
Okay. All right. So it's not. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Eli, do you have something to say, sir? I know I saw you jump on there.
Yeah, thanks, Judge, and yeah, thanks first for just being willing to hear out our proposed structure and listening and taking the feedback of many others here who agreed. So really appreciate you considering that, and totally agreed. Let's try it out. If it's a really terrible process, completely open to shifting. Just to put a little bit more granularity around it, and I think what you're suggesting, making starting off with the considerations and the goals and objectives box, is perhaps a great starting point. And then in terms of getting maybe a little bit more granular with what the structure of those meetings looks like, and I think Al's point may have started to really speak to this, but just to kind of hammer it home, what I think would be useful would be, again, gaining a collective understanding of what the status quo is and what the case is today. And again, to be clear, I'm not asking for anywhere near as thorough of presentations and as lengthy of presentations as we got in phase 1. I think if anything, just reiterating and briefly kind of reviewing that information that we already heard in phase 1 would be helpful, like 15-30 minutes to kick off a meeting on, reminder everyone, here is the status quo, here is what utilities do today under each box. That will allow us to understand what's going on today, and then we'll be able to discuss what the ultimate endpoint and end vision should look like for that box. And then based on those two things, we'll be able to understand what the gaps are that exist today and the time horizon with which we should be able to mitigate those gaps, deploy technology to be able to, decrease barriers to reforming DSP, et cetera. And so just recommending that as a general structure for kind of how we might tackle each box, understanding the status quo, the future vision, and then what that delta is, what the gap is between those two things, and how we can get to that final end state.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. Go ahead, Ethan.
I'm sorry, I don't have anything else.
Okay. I thought I saw you unmuted. Okay.
I am. That was a mistake.
It's no problem. You're just cursing as you're muted. No problem. All right. So let's say if we go for next week, I absolutely want to hear Exelon's straw man proposal, but I don't want to lose an entire meeting just on that proposal. I'm sure there'll be plenty to talk about. Would the utilities be able to provide, written comments on those first two boxes by next Thursday? Is that something that's doable?
I guess one thought, I know Eli was, talking through wanting to try and recap where we are and just recognizing that was presented in phase 1 as he recognized, and he's not looking for a full recap of that, but we also presented that again at the first meeting. So wanting not to duplicate too much work, from work products that have already been shared with the working group.
That's No, that's a very fair point, Jacob, and agree with that. Perhaps maybe if it would be possible, I know we have all of these materials from phase one, right? I wonder if we might be able to recirculate them work group wide ahead of each meeting. And it can be, ideally a week or 2 weeks ahead of each meeting, which, to your point, Jacob, I think gives folks the time to redigest, remember what, this is a year and a half ago at this point, remember what was discussed, remember where things lie right now. So yeah, if we can have some advanced circulation of the notes, and presentations related to topic X that will be covered at the next meeting, I think that would be hugely helpful just for level setting everyone's understanding. It's a good suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, the document's already out there, so I can, just resend those documents to the group.
Great.
Thank you. Mr. Bartlett.
Yeah, I think what we're saying comes back to a point that I think Jacob and a couple of other people made, which is that it's going to be really important to specify in advance what we're going to get done in each forthcoming meeting, so that, because as I just put in the chat, I think it's going to be really important that when we come to these discussions, it's not just the utilities that have thought about it. I mean, some of us may actually want to provide input as well. And the key thing is going to be that we go into it aware of, with some folks having brought themselves up to date on what is the state of the art and what are best practices, so that we're not just looking at ourselves in the mirror, but we're actually looking at what's gone on, because there is substantial experience in other places with some of these things, and there is definitely technical knowledge to be brought to bear. So we have that as a reference point. So that means defining in advance so that we come to the meetings prepared to reflect on what is being done and what might be done through that lens of what should be done.
Right. So, sir, okay, so for next meeting, what would you need to be prepared for, considering those first two blocks, the considerations feeding into the types of projections and goals/objectives?
If it's that specific, then I think that's enough.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right. And you had also talked about, some other stakeholders may want to provide comments. The more comments we get, I think the better it'll be. Again, whether we agree on things or not, I think it'll definitely provide the commission with more information. And the more comments we get in writing certainly helps everyone. So to the extent that folks want to submit comments, I just encourage you to do it as soon as you can. Yes, Mr. Bartlett.
Just the last comment. I think that Samantha, who I know just having communication difficulties, has worked with Lawrence Berkeley Lab, who have done a very extensive and very, if you look at a very informative overview of a distribution system planning process, incorporating, since they're neutral parties, they're not utilities and they're not distributed energy developers, but they're in the middle. So that kind of overview process also, I mean, if Ethan's going to put his piece on the table, which is good, I think it might be useful if we can fit in some kind of an overview like that will help us through the whole process, so that help us incorporate help us do those first two steps, basically.
Yeah, and I'm familiar with the report you're talking about, and I'd be happy to send that around to everyone as soon as we're done here today. I'm not sure who we want to draft to do a presentation about the report, but we can at least send that around.
They might be available, actually. They do this sort of thing. So,
okay, well, let's see if I'll look into that. All right. All right, so with what we've just discussed, I think again, just to touch base with the utilities, again, you think you'd be able to hit those two first boxes, or should we just try and do one? I don't want to overtax anyone.
I'll just give my personal opinion. Looking back at box one, everything incorporating that, I think there's a lot of fruitful discussion there. It may make sense to have that primary focus just there versus trying to accomplish two of them.
Okay, all right. So why don't we do that? We'll start with the considerations feeding into types of projections, and it's comments. Again, I'd like to see any comments on the 12th, so folks can have a chance to react. And if you'd like to respond in writing, that's fine. But if you could do it, by close of business on the 17th, at least folks will have 24 hours or so to review those comments. I'll take a stab at revising the agenda. Again, I appreciate everybody's flexibility with this as we kind of go through it. Eli, do you have a question, sir?
Yeah, two related questions. One for Jacob, one for you, Judge. Yeah, Jacob, first regarding just the utility presentations, and it sounds like you might have just now done like a quick skim of what was presented in phase one on that topic. We would just ask if you're able to kind of examine the bullets that fit within that box and ensure that the presentations do indeed address each of those bullets. If you're able to point us, when you recirculate that documentation, if you're just able to point the work group members to the pages or the slide numbers where you all speak to those, and then to the extent that you all identify any gaps, because I think it was ultimately the work group leader who developed the presentations and not the utilities in the end, I think. In case there are any bullets that are missing or just not thoroughly reflected in those presentations, we would just love to be able to nonetheless find a way to discuss them. So if folks are just able to come prepared, kind of ready to discuss each of those bullets that fall into that box, I think that would be hugely helpful. And then, Judge, just a question for you. You mentioned comments. Can you just provide a little bit more clarity what you're thinking of? So it sounds like you're referring to comments specifically on the pink considerations feeding into types of projections box. Any more detail on what type of comments you're envisioning from stakeholders, or are you seeking comments from just utilities? Or
no, I think when I'm asking for comments, I'm asking for comments from everyone. If OPC wanted to throw some comments in terms of what bullets in that first block should be in the utilities planning, or if you just wanted to wait and see and respond to the utilities, I mean, that'd be appropriate too. It's really kind of I'll defer to you, sir, how you want to handle that. But if you want to submit something up front in response, both, that's fine.
No, that's super helpful clarification. Thank you.
Okay.
We'll plan once we see the deck one more time. We'll plan to give it a review once again, and then we'll determine if we want to develop some comments ahead of the meting that we can use to inform the discussion, or follow the meeting with the comments instead. So
right.
Thank you for that.
Sounds good. And for the utilities, to the extent you've got your presentations from the first go around, we do have some folks that were not in the phase one, including myself, that are part of this work group. So that would be helpful to the extent you can do that. And I'll also recirculate the kind of a revised vision that we talked about earlier this morning. All right. Anything else before we sign off? All right, I will take another stab at the agenda. Again, to the extent you have issues or concerns with it, please let me know. Again, happy to change it as we move forward. And with that, I'll let you guys enjoy the rest of your Thursday, and don't forget to watch the Orioles, 1 o'clock on Saturday. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.